Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. With me this morning is Matthew Solomon, filmmaker, director, and producer of Reimagining Safety. And in a bit, we'll also be joined by good friend of the show, Renee Johnston. Matthew, please tell the audience a little bit about yourself and about the movie.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here at 8 o'clock in the morning on the West Coast on a Sunday.
Yeah.
I am. Not a lot gets me out of bed, but this does. So thank you. Yeah, reimagining. So I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. I was in the music business for many years as a professional musician. I kind of found my way into acting for a short time, and then filmmaking, writing and directing scripted films, mostly short films, and then some features. Horror and comedy were, mostly what I was working in. And along the way, I got into conflict resolution. I was always interested in communication and relationships. I have sort of a background in social justice, just, where I grew up and who I grew up with, and being aware of the issues specifically with policing and incarceration and how that has disproportionately affected the Black community, especially here in Los Angeles, and a lot of my friends. So all of that, was kind of involved in my conflict resolution work. And I was doing a lot of traveling with that before the pandemic. And then when the pandemic started and we couldn't go anywhere, everything stopped. And I decided at that point to go back to school and finish the bachelor's degree I had started like 30 years ago. And I finished a bachelor's in liberal studies with an emphasis in conflict resolution. And then, we were still in the pandemic. So I rolled into a master's program in public administration. And I kind of figured that the entertainment business was behind me, and I really wanted to be able to use my privilege and my access as a cis hetero white male to be able to help work towards positive social change. And so I was in this master's in public administration program at Claremont Lincoln University, which is about as far east of LA County as you can go until it turns into, I think, Riverside County is the next one.
Yeah, depending on where you are. Yeah, because I'm from Upland originally, and Claremont is right there next to Upland. So that's San Bernardino County.
Yeah. So like, right, they actually at CLU, Claremont Lincoln, they're like, yeah, we're as far east as LA County goes.
Yeah, my mom, fun fact, my mom is a graduate of the Claremont School of Theology, and my dad is a graduate of Pitzer, so I know exactly where you're talking about.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so I was in this master's program and applying my coursework around sustainability, governing, policy making, transformative leadership, like all of that to post George Floyd, the issues with policing and incarceration, and really interested in, because it's like I was clear that what we have isn't working, or it's working the way it's designed to work, but it doesn't work in terms of keeping everybody safe equitably and all of that. But I was applying all of the coursework towards the issues with policing and incarceration with an ear towards what are the alternatives. And so when it came time to do my final thesis project, one of my academic advisors was like, we know you can write a paper, but we also know that you have a background in film. Why don't you do like a documentary? And I was like, well, that's a lot of work, like, and she was like, yeah, it could be like 10 or 15 minutes, not a big deal. And I said, no, I can't do this in 10 or 15 minutes. And if I do it, I'm a filmmaker. It's not going to be like a video. It's going to be a movie. And she was like, well, go ahead and do that. And so I was like, okay. So I did. And I started looking for people to interview. I wanted, because it was an academic project, I wanted a variety of perspectives and lived experiences and voices. And so I didn't want just activists. I have the District Attorney of LA County, George Gascon, is in the film. USC law professor Jody Armour is in the film. Jose Gutierrez is a licensed therapist and social worker. He's in the film. I have a former LAPD officer. There's a woman named Gina Viola who ran for mayor of Los Angeles on an abolitionist platform and came in third. And Elle Jones, who's a professor from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and she's been working in prison since she was 14 years old. And she and a group of others in Halifax were commissioned to write a detailed report, a 200-page report on what it would mean to defund the police and how it would actually happen step by step. So not, theory and vagueness, but like very specifically, this is how we do it and this is who's involved. And so, I interviewed everybody. There's 10 people in the film. I turned in the project and then did a test screening with a group of actually USC law students and some abolitionists here in LA and a couple other, groups of folks. And they're like, this is really good. You should get it out there. And so I started doing film festivals and then impact screenings. And, around 1,000 people have seen the film since February. And we've had over 40 different organizations who have co-hosted or co-sponsored screening events. And then, Renee and I met through Twitter. We were in this Twitter group together, and I didn't know Renee already knew about the film. She can talk about that. But then she brought me to New Jersey, and we just had the screening last week, and it was awesome.
Yeah, I was doing my best to help promote the screening. I really wish that I would have been able to have been there, because that would have been just great. Lots of people I have a lot of respect for were there, and it would have been great to see some of them in person.
Yeah.
Of course, it would have been great to see Renee in person.
Yeah, we got to meet in person after being on Zooms and podcasts and texting for the last 3.5 years.
I've been interested in abolition for a long time. All the way back in the 90s, I was reading a lot of. He was never an abolitionist, but he was very much a whistleblower. A lot of work on policing by former San Jose Police Chief Joseph McNamara, who wrote a lot of stuff about corruption and racism in American policing.
Yeah.
And was very clear that, in most urban environments in this country today, the most dangerous criminals in a given city are almost certainly cops. As recent exposés of the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department over the last decade or so now have shown. Sheriff Joe Bach is still in federal prison, I believe. He's probably going to die there. And the gangs that he was running in the 90s are still a problem today.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the 90s, because that was really a pivotal time for me as well. So I just turned 50. And so, I was growing up 70s and 80s. In the 90s, I was going to USC, actually as a music student. But I was also taking sociology and anthropology classes because I was always interested in societies and how they work and why they don't work and all of that. And we were literally learning about systemic racism. And I wish I could remember the book, but there was some book about in New York Police Department, in the 70s kind of thing, where it was talking about the corruption and gangs and things like that. And then the professor, I remember saying something to the effect of, the laws in a society are written and created by the people in power to keep them in power. And then Rodney King happened, the Rodney King beating, and all of it was, on video, on TV, like on everybody's TV for months. And then when those officers were acquitted, it was really like a big shift for me. It was like, well, how did that happen? But it was also in the context of this class that I was in. So, yeah, that was a big time. And then, you know, it's like the LA riots happened, and then the OJ Simpson trial,
Yes.
and then the Rampart scandal, you know, the
Yep.
gang division of LAPD that was corrupt. So all of that, yeah.
And LA, it's forgotten by a lot of people. The LAPD was one of the original classic bad police departments in the post-war era.
Yeah.
Bill Parker was
Yep.
the second most famous cop in the country after J. Edgar Hoover, and was the police chief of Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
He pioneered and defended the racial profiling strategies that have brought us to the situation that we are in now. Specifically saying you over-police these neighborhoods, you under-police these neighborhoods, you stop people traveling between these points just all the time. And you do this, and you'll be able to control crime. And when you really look at the idea of people controlling crime in Los Angeles, it becomes a joke.
Yeah.
Because the LAPD has never been effective at controlling crime. What they do is they terrorize people and keep corruption to manageable levels.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Rodney King and the riots. And since I know you were a Hollywood person at one point, I will ask: have you ever seen Dark Blue with Kurt Russell?
No.
So that's a movie about corrupt cops in Los Angeles covering the time period between the arrest and going to the actual riot. The plot has nothing to do with Rodney King. It's a police corruption plot. But the Rodney King stuff is unfolding in the background, and the corrupt cops have to decide what they're going to do about their corruption and whether or not they're going to do the right thing in the context of the riots playing out.
Right.
And of course, it's completely unrealistic in that at the end, the worst cop of the bunch, Kurt Russell, has this come to Jesus moment and gives this speech about how we've all got to be better people and we can't do policing like this anymore. But it's sort of kind of funny, really, because this is a major Hollywood movie with major Hollywood stars that, for all its liberal flaws, gets that we can't do policing like this anymore.
Yeah.
You can make fun of it all you want, and you can say, well, the corrupt cops don't just come to Jesus like that. Well, you know, some of them do. That's why we know about corruption, because some corrupt cops have come to Jesus for various reasons. Mm-hmm. And then on the other side is it's a major Hollywood movie that did not get very much attention, but basically says we can't do policing like this anymore. Mm. And
I always wonder if when cops come forward, if they actually had a come to Jesus moment, or if they just realize, like, I can't really.
So
what's the word for it? Like, they're not going to be held responsible. Like, it's always after they retire or after they move.
Well, no. So the classic whistleblower, is Frank Serpico. Frank Serpico only ended up blowing the whistle about corruption was because he had to talk about corruption in order to press his workplace complaint about his coworkers harassing him. Right. He was keeping quiet about the corruption because he was trying to be a good cop and play ball, even though he personally didn't want to take the money. Right. The other cops were harassing him and bullying him, trying to get him to take the money in order to make him part of the club. Because to them, him actually taking the money meant that he was a cop. And until he actually took the money, he wasn't a cop to them. So you have this very complicated relationship between Serpico and his fellow cops in which he's trying to cover up for them and play ball up to the point his conscience will allow them. And they're saying, no, we're sorry. We're not going to let you draw these limits. You have to commit fully, or we're going to harass you until you do. And at that point, he complained to his lieutenant that the other cops were harassing him. And his lieutenant said, I've seen that, and I know why they're harassing you, and we can press this complaint. But if we press this complaint, we're going to have to talk about why. Are you willing to talk to internal affairs in the mayor's office and all this? And, well, I mean, the alternative is they're going to keep harassing me, right? Yeah. And so that was those are the two NYPD whistleblowers who were famous, Dan Dirks and Frank Serpico. Dan Dirks was the lieutenant who was also corrupt, but who also felt bad for Serpico and was willing to risk getting in trouble himself because he felt bad for Serpico. So this is a personal white guy sympathy thing for Dirks rather than a deep integrity thing.
Yeah.
And for Serpico, it's a self-defense thing. He was willing to let the corruption slide as long as he did not have to be personally involved in it. But the corrupt cops were not willing to settle for that and pushed him. And that's why he became a whistleblower. That's the perfect example since someone asked. There's often direct self-interest in protecting yourself from the people you're blowing the whistle on. It's worth noting that Serpico was shot in the face and forced into early retirement, that several police whistleblowers have been killed under mysterious circumstances, and for some reason those murders are never solved. The cops don't want to find out who killed these people who blew the whistle on or testified against cops. What could be going on with that?
Exactly.
Yeah, that just happened in Memphis.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It was the one that I always remember is the one in Austin.
Baltimore?
No, I'm sorry, Houston. Amber Geiger, where she shot the guy in his apartment and tried to claim she thought she was in her apartment, and the witness who testified against her and was probably most responsible for her conviction, a neighbor who said, no, she had been in his apartment before. They knew each other. She would have recognized that it was his apartment and not hers. Got shot, and his murder is still unsolved. But he testified against the cop who killed a black man, and then he got killed too. I'm sorry, I'm suspicious. Mm-hmm. But no, yeah, this is the sort of thing that makes me think about defunding, abolition. You look at Cop City and all the private companies donating money to Cop City. It's like, why do they even need public money if these corporations are giving them so much?
Right. And the guise of the communities behind it, which is absolutely false. And then they start pointing to all these people who are arguing are coming from out of town without acknowledging that all of these corporations are not based in Atlanta. So it's the continuous circle of, we're going to keep feeding this thing that already does not work well because it's not supposed to work well. And, but we're going to keep throwing money at it.
It works to do what it's supposed to do, which is to manage a set of stress lines of contact so that certain people don't have to be impacted by the problems of certain other people. Mm-hmm. And really, it's always been, at least in this country, well, not even just in this country, at its very most basic level, even before you throw in the race stuff in North America, policing has always been about keeping the poor away from the rich.
Right.
And maintaining those social barriers.
Yeah.
When you add the race into it in America, then it becomes about keeping all the people who are not part of the chosen wealthy white community to whom the law is actually designed to protect. We keep them in their place so that we can enjoy the good life. And it's not a sustainable system in the long run because they're sucking resources out of communities to feed this carceral machine that makes money for a lot of people in a lot of ways. And one of the traps is people talk about private prisons when the entire system of fighting wildfires in California is based on prison labor, many of whom are people in actual state prisons with no private corporation involved.
Right. And who can't get a job as firefighters when they get out, by the way.
It's true. It's true. And now they have a massive labor shortage because changes in the pot laws have required them to let too many people go. And some of these people that they've let go are their best firefighters and they can't hire them. It's just so stupid.
Mm-hmm.
The whole system is absurd. It's very frustrating sometimes as a person who watches it all happen and sees the background issue of that people really just don't understand what police actually do, right? And so we always have this circular reasoning, this circular conversation of, well, you can't have policing like this. And then people say, well, what about crime? And then you say, okay, but they don't stop crime. And then it just keeps going in this circle, this continuous like.
The one I hear all the time is, well, what about domestic abuse? Who's going to come if my husband hits me? And it's like, well, how often do the cops come when your husband hits you now?
Yeah.
And how often is the cop the one doing the hitting?
Well,
in a home,
so
right?
So I'm glad you mentioned that. 40% of police self-report as hitting their domestic partner without anybody asking them or they just say, hey, yeah, right. I hit my significant other for no particular reason. They just say it. So that's 40%. So how many of the rest aren't saying it?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Did you all watch the trailer? Just curious if you decided to do that.
Oh, we haven't shown it.
We haven't. No, we should.
Yeah. You should. You should show the trailer. You should. Do you have it, Chris?
I don't have anything. I have a stream. I have a lot.
If I send, where's the best place to? Because I'm bootleg. I'm on my phone doing this. If I send you the link on the Twitter, will that work?
That's always fine.
Okay. I think I can manage that much, Matthew.
I have faith in you, Renee.
Yeah. It was interesting you were talking about the whistleblowers, and Cerise Castle here in LA has done a lot of reporting on the deputy gangs in the LA County Sheriff's Department, and she has a podcast where she interviews some of the deputies that have come forward, and pretty much all of them came forward because they wouldn't go along with what was happening either in the jails or on the street, and then were subjected to a ton of harassment from the other deputies. And so, like you were saying with Serpico, who filed because he was being harassed, he came forward. It's the same, it seems the same. Like, would these deputies have come forward about the gangs if they weren't being harassed and beat up or put on shitty schedules? Like there were deputies where it was like, well, if you get in trouble on the street, nobody's coming, so you're on your own. So like all of that from the folks who are supposed to protect and serve, and yet if you don't go along with what they're doing, you're in danger, like in a big way. So that's the culture. It's so blatant, but it's interesting, and most people either don't know or they don't want to know, or people in law enforcement are like, well, that's not true. It's just like station pride. They're not gangs, like all of the different excuses for that. But then, here is, depositions where, and you see the tattoos and that this is going on. I know I have friends that have been incarcerated that are like, yeah, we've known about this for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's when. Sorry, go ahead.
So how well is my screen showing up at this point?
I don't see it yet.
Okay. I'm trying to share it. Let me make sure. Okay, I see. Share.
And I'll just give the trigger warning that there is some violence in the trailer.
Why is this not? What is wrong? Yes, that's better.
I gave Chris something to do.
Well, it is what it is.
There we go.
All right.
All right. That's better. Perfect. All right. Full screen. How's this showing up?
It's
Yeah, I see it.
There we go. See it.
All right. Let's see how it plays.
America's never been a place where we've had democracy and equality and freedom and liberty for all and justice for all, and all we have to do is get back to that.
Race in this country has never really been removed from the political dialogue.
Because we won't wreck it with our past. Because we will let older people say, oh, that's so old. And let's not talk about that. Slavery was so long ago. We haven't had it for 200 years. This is, not realizing that we never reckoned, we never repaired any of it at all.
Police are violence workers. We've been sold this false choice of policing nothing, which has been used to terrorize people into accepting policing when there's a whole long list of things that they would rather have that they know would help address the problems in their communities.
When we say abolish the police, we are saying we do not want policing as we know it to exist anymore.
What people don't realize when we're talking about abolition is that we're really talking about the fact that we want you to be that it's going to require that you relate to people.
We created a report, and it's called Defunding the Police, Defining the Way Forward for HRM. Like, the myth is that we need all these people in jail all day running around the streets, and that's not true. So I really try to shift us from believing that defunding is radical to recognizing that what is actually radical is investing billions of dollars into policing. So not agree that defunding the police is this radical lefty, like communist, Marxist, whatever. That is actually practical, it's good social policy, it makes sense, and here's a roadmap.
This is not some kind of abstract utopian envisioning. This is a very practical programmatic intervention.
When you begin to think differently, when you begin to look at people through the eyes of the humanity in all of us, and sort of that love for humankind, your thinking and your approach to the work starts to be very different.
Even now that I've seen it, the trailer still gives me like.
Yeah, there's stuff in the movie like it's that I still get. I mean, I've seen the movie hundreds of times at this point. I edited it, and there are things in there that it's like, oh man, this part's coming up again. It's yeah.
Now that I know that makes me want to see the movie. I'll say that. So I like that trailer. That's great.
Now, so just so you know, Chris, I set Matthew up with some people out in Washington. So might get a little closer to you so that you can see it.
I've been talking to somebody in Portland also, so I'm hoping to like Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, something.
Yep, and that's.
Oh yeah, I meant Washington State, not Washington D.C. Washington D.C. won't help.
figured after a moment or two. Some friends of mine, at least some of whom are in the Washington area, recently made a movie called Healing Us about universal health care.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a member of the group that put the movie together on the show a few months ago. That was a good show too. I'm glad to see so many people using movies to tell the truth about this stuff.
Yeah.
It's a nice trend.
I'm finding the short attention span of people to be able to actually read articles and read studies and read books. It's like people, I don't want to say people don't have time for it, although I'm sure there are a lot of people who literally don't have time for it, but there are also people who intentionally choose not to use the time to do those things.
All prioritize our time.
Right.
In a variety of ways. We choose what's important to us, and we put effort into it based on its importance.
Yeah.
I'll give you the perfect example is this show. When I'm energized and I'm feeling good and I'm putting effort into this show, then I have 3 shows booked out in a row. I know who's going to be on the show. I'm not scrambling to find guests at the last minute. I'm not canceling shows. People know they can rely on me to be here on a given week. It's great. And then when I have no energy and I can't put any effort into it, I miss a week somewhere, or I forget to schedule somebody one week and I have to ask somebody at the last minute. And then people are like, are they talking about West Virginia again? And I was like, yes, we're talking about West Virginia again. I'm sorry. This is who can come on at the last minute, and it's important. But so
it's
no,
tricky. And this is a hard conversation to have because people really, so one of the things, and you know, Matthew and I have talked a couple of times since I saw the movie, but one of the things that I pulled from it that I think is the most important thing to me is building out community structures and resources that can replace the things that people would normally call 911 for, because their assumption is that's what you're supposed to call 911 for.
There's also an important but here, and I say this not because I don't want people to do it. We need to build those structures out. This is why people were murdered in the 1970s, for building out structures that made them not require the intrusive and oppressive and dangerous parts of their city government in their neighborhoods.
Right.
This is what the Black Panthers were doing, is they were making it so their neighborhoods did not need the police.
Right.
And that was a threat to the police and to groups that depend on the police. And so when we build out those structures, we have to understand that we will be attacked and be prepared.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's not I talk a lot about like what being a revolutionary actually is, right? Like the Black Panther Party they were actually revolutionaries, right? Like they were actually pushing to change the system. And I feel like there has to be like a willingness to put your life and your freedom on the line in order to make the thing happen that you're in pursuit of. And if you're not ready to cross that line, then you are in support of the revolutionary thing, right? Which you need that also, right? Like those people have to exist, because there have to be people who can work within the system to help allow for at least a chance for these things to happen. You have to have a building. You have to have, a space. You have to have people with licenses who are able to do the things. You know what I mean? Like there are all these things that do have to come into play, because unfortunately we live in a place where you cannot, at this point in time, erase the state, right?
Exactly.
And so, it's a fine line that people have to draw. And it's a scary line that people have to draw. And, I try my best not to mock the idea of like not being brave enough to do stuff, because I don't want to go to jail. And I also would like to keep living. Like I can readily admit to that. I have no like qualms admitting to that. But at the same time, I fully intend to make some effort to see where I can plug in different places in communities that need these things to be built, because we are like literally dying due to the system, and something has to change.
We're so far from a violent revolution happening tomorrow that it's almost what's the word I'm looking for? It is almost fantasy to talk about any sort of revolution happening in the immediate short term. And what I think is important in that context and understanding that is educating people to think in revolutionary ways. And police abolition is a really good place to start, because that's something that you can get. It's not hard to look and see that the cops are not actually solving social problems of crime and violence because, it's on the news all the time to scare us. They want us to know about these mass shootings because, we need cops. They want it with one of the unspoken aspects of gun control is how much it would empower cops to make very specific decisions based on whether or not they think someone has an illegal gun. And how is that going to be enforced? It's going to be enforced by the cops. The cops are going to choose to enforce that law the way they choose to enforce the drug laws. Which is to say, selectively, and very much along race and class lines that make a difference. I hate to sound like one of the conservatives and make a bigger deal about it than it is, but no one is desperately trying to solve the mystery of the cocaine at the White House.
Yeah.
Unless it's for partisan purposes. So that's really a good way to think about our system is, crime at that level, crime that would be taken very seriously on the streets if a working person or a poor person did that, is, sort of ignored if it happens at the White House. We don't really want
that. And that's typical, right? When you think about how much people talk about, people who get mugged and people who jump turnstiles and people who shoplift, right? And then you have corporations that are literally stealing billions of dollars from workers every single day, and no one cares, right? It's okay.
My last employer made us all sign an agreement not to join class action suits against the company and accept binding arbitration instead, because they would literally lose a class action suit about wage theft every year. And it was easier for them to tell us to stop suing them than it was for them to stop stealing our wages.
That's everything, right? It's all this calculated mathematical risk, right? How much is it going to cost us if someone notices that we're doing this thing, right? Like, how much is it? How many people can we calculate out dying that won't hurt the profit line? And as long as we can keep it within that number, then we can let those lives go. Like, it doesn't matter.
How much liability are we as a state or a city admitting if we charge a politician or a cop with a crime? Fun fact, one of the basic reasons that the state of Michigan dropped all the charges against Rick Snyder and other people tremendously involved in the poisoning of Flint, which everyone knows about, and more importantly, the poisoning of thousands of kids in the Detroit school system that nobody knows about, because it wasn't covered the same way Flint was covered, but it was happening. Lead poisoning was as much a problem in the Detroit school system as it was in Flint. We just didn't get it in the news about the Detroit school system. None of those people got prosecuted in the end, because if they were convicted, the state of Michigan would have been liable and would have been sued. And the Democrats were not willing to have the state government sued if they prosecuted the Republicans. It was easier to let the Republicans go than let the state get sued.
Mm-hmm.
And so think about that. How does that equate to our everyday interactions with the police? If a problem is going to go away and someone won't be prosecuted because the city might be sued, then how does that relate to what the cops are able to get away with on a daily basis?
Yeah, in the film, Alex Vitale talks about how internal affairs is more of a system that's set up to protect the image of the department versus actually holding people to account. And Hadia Kennedy, who's a former LAPD officer, who's in the film, was in a division that was basically like internal affairs, but not like, she was like, they were investigating specific crimes in quotes, but it was more like policy things that officers were violating, not like anything bad, but that the group that was investigating officers killing people, for instance, was a very select unit and, never really came up with much. And so for her, and actually it's interesting because she got into policing because of shows like Law and Order. She wanted to, make a difference. Nikki Black, who's a sociologist from Inglewood, this isn't in the film, but she had told me in the interview, like she wanted to be a prosecutor because of shows like Law and Order, like, and a few other people, the concept of what police and the quote justice system does. And I remember being, when I was younger, it was like, yeah, I want to be a cop. I want to be SWAT because that was my favorite TV show, and we have these ideas of the heroism and the making a difference and all of that. And
see, this is why I'm weird, because my favorite TV lawyer, my formative understanding of what a lawyer should be from television is from LA Law, from where the dominant arc from the first episode to the reunion movie years after they canceled is this guy who was wrongfully convicted of murder, who Harry Hamlin wants to get off death row. And it's this perfect arc from the very first episode that ends in the reunion movie and that comes up twice in the first season. And he cares more about getting this guy who off death row than anything else in his life.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's the sort of lawyer we need, not this Law and Order stuff. But nobody ever looks at Michael Cusack in LA Law and says, that's what lawyers should be like. But if you actually look at the cases he's trying in LA Law, and it's silly because all lawyer shows you have to have the innocent defendant or the guilty defendant who's not so bad. But the thing is about real life is quite a lot of defendants are either innocent or guilty, but not really so bad.
Yeah.
And there's more reality to that heroic criminal lawyer show, for all its flaws, than there is to that heroic cop and prosecutor show.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that actually, because I was saying how I wanted a cross section and a variety of different points of views. The reason I wanted people like prosecutors in the film is when I was in my class, one of my classes, there was a TED talk from a gentleman named Adam Foss in San Francisco, who was a prosecutor. And his TED talk is how, there was this case where I think it was like a teenager. He was like 17 or 18. I think he stole something. And Adam Foss was the prosecutor. And he had this moment where he was like, the person was found guilty. And then it's up to the prosecutors to recommend what the sentence should be. And he knew, like, if this 17, 18-year-old went to jail, his life would be done. But there was something, well, if we could do something else with accountability or something, he might have a shot. And so he made a conscious choice to recommend a different system of accountability, which I don't recall what it is. I have to go back and watch it. But it's a TED Talk. You can all watch it. And 10 years later, he's at this party, and this guy walks up to him, and it was that kid, and he was like, "Thank you so much. I went to school. I got a business degree. I'm like everything's great. And if I hadn't, I would have been in gangs and crime and all of that." And so
that school to prison pipeline makes the difference between whether people have what folks from the suburbs consider a normal life, or whether they have what folks from the suburb think of as, oh, that horrible stuff that happens in the inner city.
Right. Yeah.
And it comes down to things like whether or not they are criminalized early on, because there's a whole class of criminalized people who don't have many options. You're not going to make the same income in anything you do as a legal citizen that you were making as a criminal. This is something that I talk about all the time when it comes to drugs and sex work, is that criminalizing people just creates this criminal class that has to be policed. And you're not actually solving any problems that you think you're solving. You are worsening and exacerbating the problems that you're trying to control by trapping people in a system where they have to be criminals to continue to survive because of the badge that society has put on them, because of their interaction with the system. I have a friend who got into dealing drugs, and I mean, ever since he went straight, he's been struggling with money, because he's used to always having money when he needed it, because he was selling drugs. There are people who end up poor selling drugs, but it's not because they're not making money. It's because they're spending too much.
Yeah.
And so he ever since he became a law-abiding citizen, he's had a very hard time making a living.
The abolition on the whole it's a holistic process, right? Like, I think one of the things people also deeply misunderstand is that, we're just going to get rid of every single cop in every single prison without acknowledging that you can't do that without changing the way the world works first, right? Like the young lady in the movie who talks about like not teaching her child to call 911, because why are you calling that number? Like, call, if something's wrong with me, call your grandmother. Like, she can get here fast and she can serve more purpose, right? And so understanding that there are all these things that we think are in place as like a means of protection or help or service and all these things. And none of them actually serve that purpose. Like, you're more likely to have a bigger problem if you dial 911 than you are to actually get some use out of it.
Stranger danger is one of the perfect examples. We're all, from what Matthew was saying early on about his age, we're all in the same rough age group. We all grew up in the 80s. We all remember things like Dare. We all remember things like stranger danger, where, don't talk to the stranger, go to a cop or go to your parents and get somewhere safe. And it's like, you look at it now and you think about it. That stranger is a lot more likely to save you from the cop than the other way around. If you go by the hard numbers.
Yeah.
And how many people didn't ask a stranger for help when it was their family that was abusing them?
Right.
Because of that stranger danger that led them to fear the stranger even more than they felt that they feared the family that was already abusing them. And you look at the way our systems reinforce all this, And then you look at how many cops get busted for abusing people in various ways. And it's just, it all fits together. This whole system of no accountability for people in power and strict accountability for everyone else. I watch mainstream media cover Donald Trump, and I hear prosecutors talk about, well, we have one set of law for everyone, and we're trying to prove Donald Trump is accountable. Like, stop bending over backwards not to charge him then. Stop going out of your way to be fair to him. Treat Donald Trump like you would treat a black person accused of mugging a white person, or treat that black person like you're treating Donald Trump now.
Mm-hmm.
If there's really one law for everyone, why is every criminal defendant not treated like Donald Trump?
Very true.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the thing that comes most into my head right now, because I watch the investigations and I watch people talk about how there's one law for everyone. And I think about how rarely anybody in a situation of power is charged with anything, and how they've bent over backwards to avoid doing it in this case, even though it's so obvious.
Yeah.
And it's just, no, it proves how we have just completely different sets of laws for the wealthy and the powerful, and for the poor and the marginalized.
Yep. And I don't even get me started on when you even get beyond just like, oh, this person committed a crime, right? And then you start looking at, okay, well, you start looking at the prison population and really thinking, okay, but did that person actually commit a crime, or did they plead guilty and take the lesser charge, that the lesser time that they were offered because they just wanted it to be over, right? Like, when you think about the amount of people who are just sitting in prison right now waiting for someone to listen to them in a courtroom, right?
Yeah,
and then you walk into that courtroom, right, and you're the minority in every single way. You're the only poor person. You're the only person who doesn't have family. You're the only person who doesn't have support. You're the only person who isn't white and male. Like, there's just so many things that play into it. And the system is a farce. And until people start to really understand that we are living in a state-controlled environment.
At the most basic level, what is a crime?
Right.
What is a crime? Mm-hmm. Who's deciding what to take seriously as a crime? Because again, we go back to this how many people really are innocent or guilty but not so bad, like in the movies and the TV shows. And as you look at more and more, it's like, wow, almost everyone is either innocent or guilty, but not really so bad.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
Because the thing that I see from mainstream media more than anything, and from Hollywood more than anything, is you really can humanize anyone.
Yeah.
You can make a compelling villain, an interesting human character who people sympathize with. And that's part of the problem. Because when you really can humanize everyone, it's easy to sympathize with everyone if you want to. So keeping that in mind, why is it so hard to sympathize with people in prison? Why is it so hard to humanize?
But there's also the continued lie of everyone who's in prison is there for a reason, right? Like, if you're in prison, you had to have done something. Well, not necessarily. That's not always the case, right? And if you are a poor person who can't eat and you steal food, technically that's against the law. But if you're choosing between eating and not eating, how many choices do you have?
And the police make choices in what to police. I talked about how my previous employer was being sued by wage theft every year until they made us sign paperwork not to promise not to sue them anymore. The cops never investigated my previous employer for stealing our wages, even though we're talking about what amounted to millions of dollars every year. When you take it to a company-wide level, that's grand theft on a massive scale. but there was no police investigation. It was just civil stuff, and the company was able to insulate itself to a great degree against the civil stuff, first with settlements and then with forced arbitration. So obviously the company's happy with that system, but that's theft. Why are the cops not prosecuting that company?
The same reason they don't prosecute each other.
Exactly. Well, that's the whole thing.
It's so messy. I just wanted, Matt, you only had the hour, right, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to just watch.
Well, then in that case,
since
we're getting near the end of the time Matt has, then I will say, Matt, do you have anything that you want to say? And is there any particular website that should be promoted at this point?
Yeah, thank you. Website is reimaginingsafetymovie.com, and our Instagram is Reimagining Safety Movie, and we have a lot of screenings coming up across the country. I actually was contacted by a couple people in South Africa also about doing some screenings there, and then Canada and the UK. But right now we're working on Seattle. Actually, we'll be in LA on August 18th at the Skid Row Museum and Archive in downtown LA, and then Seattle September 2nd, and then there's a big screening event in Sacramento September 22nd that's been in the works for like 3 or 4 months, I think, and it's with the Sacramento Valley Psychological Association, and then Sacramento State University is co-sponsoring, and so we have a lot of screenings coming up.
That's
and
great.
And if anybody's watching this, excuse me, and you want a screening in your area, you can reach out to me and we can set something up.
If let me know if anything, what goes on with the group in Portland you're talking to. If anything happens with that, let me know. I'll see if I can. I mean, I can't promise anything, but I can see what I can do.
Yeah.
There's got to be somebody else in Portland who could step in if necessary.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of my former professors teaches at Portland State. He's been trying to get me up there. There's a few people up there who are like, we want to get you here, and it's just taken a while. It's funny, Renee, like we talked, and 3.5 weeks later it was done.
Renee is amazing. I'm a big fan of Renee. I have her on the show every chance I get. She really does a great job of putting events together, I've noticed.
Yeah, it was.
My wild hairs are no joke. Once I decide we're gonna make this thing happen, and
I was like, we got to do more. We got to do more together. Yeah,
we should. Yeah. I already told you I'm all in, and I'm just watching to see where your next chips fall, and then I already in my head know what's happening in the fall. I just have to get it on your calendar.
Yeah. Oh, and Camille, we are working on Philadelphia also. Actually, if you have some works, please email me through the website. That would be awesome. And just to say, for me, like, it's really about supporting the movement and getting the information out there. And so I my goal is for as many people to see this as possible, and for this to be a resource for the abolition community, and which was awesome because Chuck Modiano, who was on the panel, like literally said, I'm just going to tell people to go watch this movie now because I'm tired of talking about like all the fine points.
Yeah.
So that's been really great.
And that's what we need. We need people doing what you're doing, and I really appreciate the work you're doing. Movies are one of the ways into the culture, and it's a cultural struggle as much as anything else. People have to be able to think about these things in different ways in order to reorganize society in different ways. So thank you for the work you're doing, and let me know how I can help too, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for getting up, Matt. Appreciate you.
Yeah.
I get up this early. I get up this early on a Sunday because I frequently have guests from the East Coast, and because I know that the mainstream shows are on a Sunday around this time. So I know people are free to watch, and let's give them an alternative if they want one.
Yeah. Don't get me started on Tiffany Cross and all of that stuff.
Well, no, that's the whole thing. So I'm going to say, I was never a fan of Tiffany Cross, but, and this is a very big but, she really went out there in an honest way, true to her principles, when Joe Biden did not live up to her expectations of him. And she was fired for it. And I respect that.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether I was a fan of her work before that happened or not. I think much more highly of her since that incident than I did before. And not having ever been a fan of her before, I am now. I would now actually think very differently about whether or not I would become a fan now because of that. It made me, that whole thing between her and MSNBC made me rethink the way I thought about her. And that's just because, at that moment, she stood up when she was supposed to, and she faced consequences for it and did not let that deter her. We don't see that in media very much.
No.
All right, Matthew, don't be late for noon.
Yeah. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Renee. How are you doing?
No problem. I'm hanging in. You know me.
I really appreciate you putting me in touch with Matthew. That was a great show. Good.
He's great. He was a great person to work with. He was very helpful. He answered emails quickly, answered text messages quickly. And I know, people say like, I can't, doing things in a short amount of time actually works out better because you can just get it done, right? The longer you stretch it out trying to get it done, the more likely it is that it doesn't happen. You know what I mean?
It's easier sometimes for people to say in a fairly short amount of time, let's do something this Friday, than it is for them to say, let's do something a month from now. Simply because this Friday is easier to plan in the world we live in than a month from now.
Exactly.
Not that I'm not
happy I can
be booked ahead. I'm glad I'm booked ahead. It makes my life easier. But sometimes it's easier to book something for that Friday on Wednesday than it is to book something for that Friday on Monday.
Absolutely. And I'll say, like, standing at the back of the room, hey, Camila, my sister, standing at the back of the room and realizing that it was just about full. And seeing people really engage in the conversation after, and it was a proud moment for me. I'd never done anything with a movie screening before. It was really literally me like chasing Matthew around Twitter, trying to figure out how I can watch the movie, and realizing like, if I did a screening, then I could watch the movie and a whole bunch of other people could watch the movie, and maybe that would be super helpful. And it was because of him that Alex Vitale agreed to come, which was very, very cool. And I was very excited, obviously, when Olay said she would be there, and when Amani and Christina said they would come. And then when Chuck told me he was going to get on the train and come up to Jersey, I mean, it came together in such a way that it was the thing that I wanted it to be. And, that doesn't always happen. And I was really, really grateful that Matthew agreed to let me show it. And it was great. It was a good experience. It really was.
Chuck is great. It doesn't shock me to know that he would get on a train for that, because I mean, he's really, if he can, he will. I've noticed that.
Mm-hmm. Chuck is awesome. Have you had him on here yet?
I have not had him on here. I need to, but
you gotta try and get Chuck on. Chuck is something. He's something.
Well, it's one of those, when someone already has a big audience, I get, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm very rarely intimidated to ask people without much of an audience, because I love the idea of helping someone sort of get into the groove of talking to people live and things like that. So, I mean, I tend to be intimidated about bigger audiences, and am I being selfish if I want to? Am I trying to promote myself too much instead of other people? Things like that.
I don't know. I feel like if someone has a big following, but their message is a good one, then for me, they're different, right? Like Chuck being who he is and so honest about like his point of view of things and how he got to the place where he is right now and all those things. I just feel like, I don't know, like if it benefits you, great. But I feel like there's so much to get out of that conversation that it's worth even the few people who are like, oh, he's just having him on to get some clicks or whatever. Like, okay, that's great, but you're going to learn so much in that conversation that it's totally worth whatever minor pushback is going to come. Not to mention that Chuck's just awesome. So send me a note, because I'll text Chuck and be like, Chuck, what you doing on a Sunday at 11? Let's try and get
Fair enough.
That's my guy. I love Chuck. He's the best.
I love Chuck too. I've always done my best to try to promote Chuck. I'm what's the way I would put it? I really try to platform people who might not get platformed otherwise, too. Ordinary people as much as possible.
Yeah.
Not that Chuck's not an ordinary person too. He's a working guy like the rest of us.
Yeah.
It's real hard to make a living in his line these days.
It's tough, especially being truthful about it.
Yes.
It's a lot easier to just go with the crazies, and
even going with the flow. How many people have been laid off in mainstream media and replaced with copywriters and chatbot?
True.
Yeah, it's grotesque.
All right, I'm gonna go have my coffee.
Of course.
It was sorry I was a little late. I was like doing the run-in, trying to get myself together.
It was good to have the chance to talk to Matthew. I think I did a good job of letting Matthew talk and not talking too much myself for a change, so that's good. Thanks both for bringing Matthew on and for joining us yourself. I really appreciate it. Everyone else, I hope you have a great week. I will go ahead and have a bit of a monologue after Renee goes. Renee, you have a good one. We'll tweet at you.
All right. I'll see you soon. Bye.
See you soon. And so, folks, I just want to sort of reiterate some of the things we were talking about policing. It's a system that is designed to keep the poor away from the rich and the black away from the white, and to make sure everybody stays in their section of society. It's not something that's designed to keep us safer. It's something that makes many of us more at risk, especially if we come in contact with the police and we don't meet their expectations of who they should be encountering in the place they're encountering us. So it matters that their job is to enforce these divisions and not keep us safe. It shows why the police are willing to abuse their power. It shows why the police have something to lose from not abusing their power and protecting their position. But what I want to come back to is something that Renee and I touched on briefly, is when you think about Cop City, it's the perfect example of the problem. When you big corporations giving massive amounts of money to build this police facility, and they're asking for public money on top of it, when all this private money means that the cops should already be paid for, but then they're supposed to suck the money out of the city's budget. They're supposed to get more money from the state. They're supposed to get money from the federal government on top of that. So keep in mind that when Joe Biden talks about the federal government helping put more cops on the street, first, we're talking about enforcing these divisions in society. And second, we're talking about pouring more money into that system of keeping us divided while not doing anything to help us because it's being sucked up by the police instead. They're eating our resources. The cops are parasites on the system. You can't ignore that anymore. It's part of the problem. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on a Sunday morning. I hope you have a great week. Please please share. If you're watching this on YouTube, please pop it up on Facebook or Twitter. If you're watching this on Twitter, please mash the like and the retweet. If you're watching this on Substack, please share the link on Substack. Really, right now, more than anything else, one more person watching this is a victory. One more patron is a victory. It's still paying for itself, but I'd like to get up to 20 patrons. I could use your help. Follow the show on Twitter at the Eclectic Rad. Follow me on Twitter at Eclectic Radical. And the Patreon is right here on the screen. Please consider becoming a patron. Thanks very much, and I hope you have a great week. I'll tweet at you.